I rather dramatically declared last year that I had not watched a single film in the Disney animated canon since 2019 with Frozen 2, and I seem to be one of the 2 people that actually enjoyed it. But I am now all caught up, having loved Encanto, been extremely meh towards Raya, suffering through Wish, and needing to do Moana 2 in 2 sittings.
I am unclear as to what you are doing.
But anyway, I can finally see what everyone means when they say they're tired of Disney's quirky girls.
Because I know your pauses.
I'm maturing. My pauses are changing.
Now, as a crash course for anyone who's normal and not a deranged Disney history geek like me, The Mouse lost the top spot in terms of who was making the most beloved animated films in the West somewhere around the early 2000s. I mean, Best Animated Film wasn't introduced at the Oscars until 2001, and the first winner wasn't a Disney film, but rather DreamWorks' Shrek. And that's not to mention the string of beloved Pixar films, which maintained a hot streak until debatably the mid-2010s. So by the time Disney really came back to prominence, they had 2 other animation studios to compete with, even if they did own one of them. Their return to prominence is recognised with the film Tangled, their CGI adaptation of the Rapunzel fairy tale, interpreting the gal with the good hair as less an idealised beauty and more a socially awkward klutz designed to be endearing, while still being very action-oriented. And while Rapunzel herself is a beloved character, and felt somewhat fresh and new at the time, little did we know that she and Tangled overall would set the tone for the next decade in terms of Disney's house style, leading men, and heroines. Anna from Frozen, Judy from Zootopia, Asha from Wish. Technically Honey Lemon from Big Hero 6 is only a supporting character, but there she is. And Moana from the title movie got the quirkiness increased in her sequel.
Bring it on, Coco! Nuts!
Mirabelle from Encanto is sometimes lumped in with this, but we'll get to that. We on the internet have not been quiet about how tiresome this formula is getting, so let's examine exactly how we got here and who we can really point the finger at.
How could I marry a prince? I'd have to be a princess.
Okay, so up until the late 80s, animated films at Disney were typically released when they were finished. Like, Sleeping Beauty was in production for 8 years, not seeing a release until 1959, and Uncle Walt wanted to take his time since it was his masterpiece. But the entire film industry was shaken up in the mid-70s, when a film called Jaws was released simultaneously in hundreds of cinemas around America, which beforehand was usually a sign that a film was bad and studios just wanted to dump it out there before bad reviews and word of mouth could slow attendance. But this created the idea of a movie release as a unifying cultural event that you just had to be there for. And so, the summer blockbuster was born. Now, this didn't change Disney's release strategy too much, since their output in the 70s and 80s weren't doing record-breaking business, and the animation department was almost shut down altogether when the Black Cauldron bombed. But with the unexpected success of The Great Mouse Detective, the decision was made that they would release a new animated film every year, and there would typically be an A studio movie considered more prestigious, and a B studio project that was a little more experimental. Like, The Lion King was a B studio movie that the higher-ups didn't think anyone would want to see, and look how successful it became. So Disney's strategy of one film a year may have produced the beloved classics that made up the Renaissance, but when a film like Kingdom of the Sun needed an additional 6 months to be perfected, Disney already had merchandise deals with McDonald's and Coke, and they wanted a 2000 release, so the movie was retooled into The Emperor's New Groove and rushed out. Which just about worked out well since it is a beloved film in its own right, but here you see Disney's priorities shifting towards basically done is better than perfect. But even though there was a crunch, one could argue that Disney still had an emphasis on artistic integrity under the guidance of Michael Eisner, who may have been the basis for Lord Farquaad in Shrek, but when he was brought on as chairman of the Walt Disney Company in the 80s, he took the role of guarding Walt's legacy very seriously. See the documentary Waking Sleeping Beauty, where there's this exchange with Diane Sawyer.
Afford to do what you want to do in animation as much as you want to do?
The answer is no, but we're doing it anyway. We have to do in this company.
And while there were things like title changes to make the movies more marketable, Eisner still felt that these animated films mattered, and that artistic integrity did count for something.
Have to.
We have to. That is our legacy.
Which you can see in every heroine in the Renaissance films especially. Ariel was the first princess since Aurora, and she was a more action-oriented character, and more obviously flawed, while being outspoken and quite eccentric, which perfectly fit her story of being a fish out of water, and was tied to the movie's emotional beats. Then Miss Bianca is a glamorous jet-setting spy, Belle was the first princess to be in her 20s, and although considered a weird girl in a universe like Ariel, she was more brains than brawn. Then Jasmine was the first born princess, and the first to shed light on how being one isn't all fun and games, even saying,
"Then maybe I don't want to be a princess anymore."
Pocahontas was intended to be even older and maturer than her predecessors, ironic, yes, and she's learning to be a leader while also giving up romance for the sake of a bigger picture. Following her, Esmeralda is a G-rated exotic dancer who also fights for the oppressed and has to deal with the twisted desires of the movie's villain. Then we have Meg, who starts out working for the villain and getting a redemption arc. Next is Mulan, who spends most of the film disguised as a man and fighting in a war. Then Jane Porter is a softer and more intellectual character, while also playing the damsel in distress trope for low comedy. And even with the following films, though The Emperor's New Groove has no typical female lead, Chi-Cha is the first pregnant Disney character, and a great example of how the wife can still be a fun part of the story.
There is no handle in here.
There's not? Are you sure?
Kida from Atlantis was likewise intended to be a warrior princess and different from her predecessors, trying to save a declining civilization and being the most powerful magic user in the story. She's the first princess to become a queen at the end. Then Nani is a hard-working regular girl who has to take care of her eccentric younger sister. Even Treasure Planet turns the captain into Emma Thompson, and I do not need to say any more on the perfectness of this decision.
Sterling, tough, dependable, honest, brave and true.
Please, Captain.
Oh, shut up, Harry. You know I don't mean a word of it.
I'll stop there, but you see, although they were following a formula to an extent, the characters still fit the story, and an effort was made to distinguish them from each other. Now, once Disney suffered back-to-back financial bombs in Treasure Planet, Brother Bear, and Home on the Range, that was what convinced Michael Eisner to shut down the animation division altogether, and they just released CGI films because Pixar and DreamWorks had shown that was what was selling. And while it wasn't long before they attempted to bring 2D animation back with The Princess and the Frog, by the time they did, they had two new types of enemies to contend with. I'm going to show you an example of two types of critics, and disclaimer, this is not to put everything on them specifically. This is more referring to what both of them represented, because this wasn't tied to one person.
Hello, I'm the Nostalgia Critic. I remember it so you don't have to.
First is Doug Walker, who rose to fame in the 2000s portraying a character called the Nostalgia Critic who riffed on bad movies from his childhood and zeroed in on perceived plot holes or inconsistencies for comedic effect.
If you're gonna have plants move, you have to have a reason for it!
And soon everyone and their grandmother was doing this kind of nitpicking and calling it criticism, with Doug's fans in particular treating his word as the absolute gospel. And while he was playing a character and exaggerating for comedy, that wasn't the case with the imitators. And this kind of criticism led to an increased scrutiny on female characters especially, with the fledgling TV tropes documenting two extremes that creators had to work hard to avoid. First was the faux action girl, where a heroine would be accused of being a bad character if she ended up in trouble too many times or didn't save herself, and for some reason it didn't count if she had fight scenes against minor characters or other women. It made very little sense. The other extreme was the Mary Sue, taking a term that originated in Star Trek fanfiction, referring to a pattern with self-inserts. These characters usually had excessively tragic backstories that were more about generating sympathy than informing character, lacked fundamental flaws that made them seem impossibly perfect, and often existed on a moral high ground compared to the other characters. But the term quickly got thrown around at any character who wasn't an obviously terrible person, or else it was just used as shorthand for character I don't like. And this is very much a glass houses situation because I did not like Prue from Charmed and referred to her as a Mary Sue. And while I do see plenty of issues with the character nowadays, I also see more nuance and complexity now that we're out of the worst days of that nonsense. Disney-wise, the character who got hit with this the most was Pocahontas, which I've already debunked multiple times, though the classic three princesses did get a bit of this, as did Rapunzel when she came along. And for those of you who weren't there, trust me, as a budding writer, having your character branded a Mary Sue was considered the biggest mark of shame, and so the pressure was on to make sure you weren't writing someone too idealized. And there were even, is your character a Mary Sue litmus tests, but simply making the character more flawed came with its own baggage, and not just the fear of getting her labeled a faux action girl. Now we get to critic number 2.
Everything is sexist, everything is racist, everything is homophobic, and you have to point it all out.
Here we have Anita Sarkeesian, the face of a company called Feminist Frequency, who represented the other extreme regarding bad faith criticism. Rather than riffing on bad movies for comedic effect like a Doug Walker type, she and her team examined tropes and works under an extremely narrow and extremely sex-negative lens, with the luridly titled Tropes vs. Women. And rather than coming at things from a perspective of, hey, some of these are overused and it would be nice to get something different, these critiques amounted to thing I don't like, therefore harmful, therefore must be destroyed, as well as relying on the fallacy that media creates culture rather than simply reflecting it. And the misrepresentations were staggering. And sure, we all make mistakes, me especially, so again, glass houses, but works and characters would be branded problematic based on arbitrary things that weren't even consistent. Like Betty DeVille from the Rugrats was branded as straw feminist based on her appearance alone, ignoring that the character was a loving wife and mother who broke stereotype by showing that the butch or less traditionally feminine woman could be a nurturer. Similar is 500 Days of Summer being described as a straight manic pixie movie when the entire story is deconstructing Tom's unhealthy view of women.
It just wasn't me that you were right about.
The same video also included Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind among a list of straight manic pixie films, which was one of many reasons it was suspected that she and her team did not watch the media they critiqued, and if they did, went in with an agenda to misrepresent it. This was hardly exclusive to them. It was all over pop feminism, and yes, indeed, the Disney princesses were hit with a wave of it, including accusations that they were responsible for the gender pay gap. And intersecting with that was the ever-growing narrative that the princesses were terrible role models. We all know what Ariel and Belle got, but I want to highlight the awfulness of this criticism with another princess.
Pains me to see you reduced to this, Jasmine.
Jasmine got an absurd amount of victim blaming for being forced into this slave girl costume, not helped by the persistent myth that she was actually 15 and therefore Disney was sexualizing a minor. And supposedly this was Jasmine's fault for being a bad role model, even though Jafar literally became the most powerful sorcerer in the world. Yeah, it didn't make sense. But going back to Sarkeesian specifically, her biggest faux pas was in insisting that the damsel in distress trope was pushing the idea of women as rewards or trophies, and therefore was harmful. Leanna did an excellent video as part of her series Lady Bits going into the true origin and meaning of the damsel in distress trope, so do check that one out.
The damsel in distress trope was a stepping stone to seeing women as people instead of property, through the idea that it was inherently rewarding to help the innocent instead of just allying with the powerful.
And this was not a case of the feminists ruined everything, because it was still mostly men making the media, and in effect trying to appease a specific branch of critics rather than listening to multiple perspectives. And it didn't matter that the majority of these takes were misguided or misrepresentative of the media they critiqued, because we tended to just platform whoever screamed loudest. Again, not these two people specifically, they were just symptoms of a greater problem from which the industry has still not recovered. So you can see the thin lines everyone was walking creatively. You can't make the character too good or too escapist, or else they'll get torn apart for being a Mary Sue, and people will avoid the work if angry white guy says so. But you also can't make her too flawed, or else she'll be accused of being harmful or a bad role model, and that's a big no-no when you're also relying on parents buying merch of these characters for their daughters, which they won't do if angry white lady says problematic, or pernicious if we're talking about Sarkeesian specifically. So was there a happy medium at all? We need to talk about Bella Swan.
Just Bella.
The Twilight Saga was something of an anomaly when the first film hit cinemas in 2008, 2 years before Tangled got released. While it was following a trend of adapting a series of supernatural-themed books enjoyed by teens, it had a more feminine leaning, with a romance at its core. The first Twilight film even faced execs trying to turn it into pretty much a high school version of Underworld, with Bella being a more action-oriented character because they were sure it wouldn't sell as is. We'll put a pin in that. But whatever the case, we got a faithful adaptation, and it at least proved that blockbusters with a more female focus could dominate the box office. And Bella Swan was put under the microscope as to whether she was a good character or a bad one. As is, she's the audience surrogate, there for the reader to identify with and picture that they're her as they experience the romance with the dangerous vampire. While there was plenty of she's a bad role model criticism, she was singled out as a textbook example of a Mary Sue. She doesn't believe herself to be pretty, but the narration from her perspective describes her flatteringly, and every guy at school is interested in her. She knew that Edward would never notice her, and suddenly he does, and she's the only one around who's immune to his telepathy. And anyone who doesn't like her is a one-dimensional antagonist, although to be fair, accurate as far as teenagers go. But what was Bella's other defining attribute?
Sorry.
And here we have the one acceptable flaw to give to a female character that will appeal to both sides. She can't be a Mary Sue because look at how clumsy she is. She's totally not perfect. And in fact, you get respect for creating someone relatable and not putting women on pedestals. And in hindsight, it's even so funny that Mandy Moore voiced the princess who started all of this, because she guest starred on Scrubs as Julie, who's introduced as a seemingly glamorous beauty, with JD's narration even saying,
"And yet there's something so accessible about her,"
before revealing her to be a klutz of the highest order. And while I like her in the role of Rapunzel, these 2 episodes are the best use of Mandy Moore in anything ever, and I am not biased, not one bit.
Oh gosh! Oh dear! Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! I am so sorry. Oh no, it happened.
And the skeptics here may be thinking that it's all coincidental and a mega corporation like Disney wouldn't have anything to fear, but let's take out that pin and return to The Princess and the Frog.
This could be a little better.
Disney's attempt at returning to 2D animation grossed a respectable $271 million and was a financial success, but not the kind of mega hit they were hoping for. Well, that was probably down to being released only a week before Avatar, and its lukewarm reception meaning that good word of mouth didn't boost attendance like with Frozen. Disney attributed it to 2 things: 2D animation being considered a children's medium, and the word princess in the title scaring away boys. Because now Disney films had to be what we call 4-quadrant, meaning they had to appeal to these 4 demographics. And this isn't me speculating, John Lasseter admitted this. And unfortunately, the Disney princess lineup does share some of the blame as well, because the franchise as established was essentially grouping the most popular pre-existing characters whose movies had already been released and made a cultural mark. But now, the new princesses they created were also expected to be inducted into the lineup, as well as being associated with the stigma that they were for girls only. Things were just different in the 90s, where unisex or gender-neutral media for children was all the rage. And films like Pocahontas and Mulan weren't considered girls' movies just because of female protagonists who the titles were named after. But in the 2000s, suddenly everything became gendered again, with Disney even trying to segregate their programming by creating Disney XD as a network intended for boy-oriented media, while keeping Disney Channel for girls. And you can see this 4-quadrant shoehorning in The Princess and the Frog with how insufferable Naveen's character is. See, he's not like those sissy princes who sing about love and commit to one woman, he's a player. He makes fun of her, he's cool, guys.
"Do not kiss her."
Now just a second.
Meanwhile, Tangled was going to be titled Rapunzel up until a few months before its release, and John Lasseter explained the reason for the change. There was an audience perception that these movies were just for little girls, but when boys, men, whatever actually see these movies, they like them. So on Rapunzel, we changed the name and called it Tangled. We did marketing that made the people who would not normally show up say, "Hey, this looks pretty good." Frozen, likewise, was originally titled Anna and the Snow Queen, and I assume the reason Moana got to keep its title is down to the crossover success of Let It Go proving that little girls could turn Disney musicals into blockbusters. But you see Disney starting to prioritize what would sell best over artistic integrity. And while they obviously did want to make money in the Renaissance days, let's remind ourselves that Jeffrey Katzenberg tried to cut part of your world from The Little Mermaid based on one child dropping his popcorn during a test screening. And Howard Ashman fought for it to remain in the film because it was key to putting the audience in Ariel's perspective. Since, as a Broadway veteran, he knew that you couldn't cut the I Want song and expect the musical to still work. And while they wanted it to succeed with audiences, the priority was still on making it work as a story and what was best for the film they created. Tangled was in production for almost as long as Sleeping Beauty, and the nightmare that was the songwriting process was detailed by the great Klaxon Cares Too Much. Channel name is false advertising, we should all care that much. Tangled was born out of a desire to outdo Shrek, and indeed the DreamWorks animation style as a whole, and eventually John Lasseter trying to force Disney into the Pixar mold, and in effect nerf the music so that it wouldn't upstage the visuals. If you're wondering why Rapunzel's I Want song plays as the Unshaved Mouse describes it, less like the anthem for a Disney princess and more like the theme music for a Disney Channel sitcom called That's So Rapunzel, because musicals are for girls and we have to hit the 4 quadrants. Since it was also a thing that Pixar's films conspicuously had no female protagonists until 2012. Like, Tangled is not a bad film, and I used to love it, but more and more I can see the 4 quadrant restrictions. And even watching it back, I don't dislike Rapunzel, and if you watch my Disney Princess video I made a joke about no one coming after her for being a bad role model, but my stance on her is reversing the more I think about it. I can feel the thin creative line they're walking, and even if Rapunzel wasn't focus grouped, she feels that way.
I will use this.
I like Mandy Moore in the role, but the more I compare her as Rapunzel to Jodie Benson as Ariel, Paige O'Hara as Belle, Irene Bedard as Pocahontas, and yeah, Anika Noni Rose as Tiana, my final reaction is more, yeah, she's fine, rather than she is definitive and legendary in this role, all hail Mandy. And while it's common to call Anna from Frozen a retread of Rapunzel, I'm going to argue that Anna at least stands on her own as a character. Rapunzel's quirkiness is there to be cute and endearing, and feels more like a counterbalance to anyone who thinks she might be too perfect otherwise, since there is a whole sequence of her winning a group of ruffians over just with her goodness. Anna, meanwhile, was written to be the same, but Kristen Bell had a hand in shaping the character to be closer to her, where she's less endearingly quirky and more socially inept and genuinely weird, and therefore feels better rounded. And because there were two princesses, Anna didn't have to stand in for the entire female experience, as was often the case with female protagonists. Having rewatched Tangled and Frozen so close together, Anna feels more like a character I connect to and a fully rounded person, with the story even inviting us to pass judgment on her, perhaps a little too much so.
You got engaged to someone you just met that day?
Yeah.
Rapunzel, on the other hand, can feel like a factory creation designed to appeal to everyone and offend no one, admittedly with a gifted actress in the role and some genuinely nice moments.
Find your humanity!
So although I think both films have plenty of issues as well as pluses, I'm one of those people that thinks the Tangled versus Frozen debate is useless, and they're both about the same. And we see Disney applying this trope liberally over the next decade. Big Hero 6 doesn't really count since it's male-focused, and Honey Lemon is merely a quirky supporting character in an ensemble who's already comedic, so not really an issue. Though it's worth noting that this is a big character change from the comic. Zootopia is borderline since it is a buddy comedy, and Jennifer Goodwin is mainly a comedic actress, with even more serious roles like Once Upon a Time still having her bringing a brightness and humour to a lot of her lines.
We were soulmates. Really? What were you in for? Banditry.
And if you watch her in interviews, she comes across as a very bubbly person, so Judy may fall comfortably within formula, but it could be argued that this is just tailoring the character to the actress. It is, however, again worth noting that the original vision for the film was first a James Bond pastiche that sounds way more interesting than the finished version, and then a darker dystopia where predators had to wear shock collars, but the folks at Pixar said it was too sad and the setting too unlikable, and what resulted was the push for something relatable. And these changes happened only 8 months before the release date, so we're starting to see a pattern.
Come for this? The heart? You mean this heart right here? Come and get it!
Moana I've often called a movie and character that on paper feels extremely rote and formulaic, but in execution I always end up mostly enjoying it.
Okay, first, I'm not a princess.
Moana, like Rapunzel, can sometimes feel less like a character and more a collection of traits that Margaret tested well, but Ali Carvalho's performance is just that good that she brings her to life. Definitely helped by Lin-Manuel Miranda's music giving the film that distinctive voice that Tangled didn't have. And while Moana is something of a warrior princess / girl boss, the fact that it's her compassion for the monster that saves the day is something about the movie I wholeheartedly champion, as that makes her the first princess to redeem her villain, with the Know Who You Are sequence having that vintage Disney beauty to it. But Moana is the film that should have cast off the formula, and yet it still falls back into it, with Moana having several comedic moments that are a bit much when you take into consideration that her beloved grandmother just died.
I can't believe you. Fish peeing you all day!
But then again, Ali Carvalho has that natural bubbly energy in interviews, and she was 14 when she recorded her part, so this could also be a case of the actress informing the character. I mean, most of the jokes do land, and the only genuinely bad one is...
when you use a bird to write with, it's called tweeting.
It's the presence of Maui that highlights the issue.
Wait, it's getting warmer. Ah, that is disgusting!
Post-2000s Disney had to have an immature male lead who makes fun of the female lead, and gives her a dressing down at first to be the audience surrogate for boys and make them feel secure in their masculinity for watching a princess movie.
How does she know you love her?
Oh, no. It started with Robert in Enchanted, and then continued with Naveen, Flynn Rider, Kristoff, and now Maui, even when the movie doesn't even have romance in it.
If you wear a dress and you have an animal sidekick, you're a princess.
Seriously, on my latest rewatch of Moana, I found Maui such an unnecessary character, and found myself wondering why the movie didn't just have Moana's father be her sailing partner and make the story about them learning to see each other's perspectives. But then again, a dad as the boy audience identifier might not bring in that quadrant. And this is frustrating, because Tangled proved that a movie about a princess could be a hit, and Frozen proved that little girls could turn a musical into a blockbuster. So this should have been the time to innovate and deviate from the 4-quadrant formula now that they knew they had their audience. But then again, although Frozen was a runaway success, it also got plenty of backlash for how widespread Let It Go was, similar to what happened with My Heart Will Go On in the 90s. So when your biggest success is being openly enjoyed by so many little girls, you gotta mock the shit out of it to avoid alienating those other quadrants. Hence this mean-spirited and really nonsensical joke in Zootopia.
Life isn't some cartoon musical where you sing a little song and your insipid dreams magically come true. So let it go.
And I have to wonder if the quirkiness of the heroines was there to have them be the butt of jokes, and therefore encourage the part of the audience who dislikes the princesses, or indeed girliness, to laugh at them.
If you start singing, I'm gonna throw up.
And this was also the height of Joss Whedon's influence on movie dialogue post-Avengers, where characters were constantly quipping to break the tension, or lampshading everything, and we used to praise this sort of thing for not taking itself too seriously, but now, with the benefit of hindsight, we see it as sacrificing character voice and what best serves the story in favour of showing off how clever the writer is.
Really? Blow dart in my butt cheek.
And it did seem as though we were coming out of it by the end of the 2010s, since Frozen 2 did show its quirky girl as having matured in the 3 years between movies, and Anna continues to develop until she becomes Queen of Arendelle. And then Encanto felt genuinely transgressive, since we have a 3 if not 4-dimensional lead character, and there's no snarky man-child in there to make metatextual jokes. The closest thing to a male lead being Bruno, we don't talk about Bruno, who not only is 50 years old, but is radically different to Naveen, Flynn, Kristoff and Maui. And people do insist that Mirabel falls within the quirky girl formula, but Encanto is drawing heavily from Latin American culture, where it's a joke there that families will have a good child expected to be pretty and perfect, in this case Isabella, then a parentified helper who does everything for everyone, hello Luisa, and then a third kid who has no function and therefore tries to overhelp to try and have a place. Here's a quote from someone better informed on that than me. Encanto and Coco and Soul are heavily coded to a community, so there's a lot of subtle stuff. Each of the characters of the Madrigal family are a different manifestation of intergenerational trauma. If you haven't met couples like Felix and Pepper, you don't get why their exceptionally extroverted and hyper-aware kids make sense, because they were always monitoring and distracting Mother from intense trauma responses. And then Julieta and Augustine seem normal, but they ended up with 2 perfectionist girls, and then Mirabel, who is just the receiver for the entire damned family, so there's no space for her to develop her own thing. We don't talk about Bruno's, but we don't really notice Mirabel's. She's not a quirky girl, she's someone who inhabits the "You're not Luisa, Isabella, Antonio, Dolores, or Camilo, why are you so weird, why do you amount to nothing?" With families like that, they have to be exceptional, but Mirabel is helping everyone else, so she had no time or ability to develop her own thing. This movie is so good and so deep it should have marked the start of Disney rebounding, casting off the formula and telling new stories. But alas...
Thank you, I feel seen.
Wish is a film I read so much about that I felt as if I had seen it by the time I sat down to watch it, but even that could not prepare me for the fact that it took me nearly 3 hours to get through the first half, because I kept needing to take breaks to process and go, what is this movie? And yep, Asha is a big chunk of that because she's kind of a nothing character, although I will give credit for attempting an origin story for a fairy godmother, which could have been interesting. And while I have been slightly negative towards Rapunzel, I will say that even if her persona can feel manufactured, it at least feels organic to her position in the movie. She's been alone in a tower for 18 years and her only communication has been with a silent chameleon and an abusive mother who wants to keep her prisoner so she can keep exploiting her magic hair. Her personality tracks with what's been established in the story. Same for Anna, who again grew up starved for human connection. But before we go into Asha, I'll also talk about how design informs characterization. Take Princess Jasmine. Her costume is not, as commonly assumed, meant to evoke a belly dancer, but rather a crop top. Aladdin is a deliberately anachronistic movie, and Jasmine is the princess that corresponds the most to the girl power era it was made in. And a crop top was a young woman's way of coding dangerous, independent, do not mess with me. Think the Spice Girls, TLC, hell, even S Club 7 were for children, and all 4 girls were always in crop tops. So Jasmine's costume tells us that she is outspoken, athletic, and will not take shit. and they chose to make it turquoise and associate Jasmine with water because water is the most precious substance in the desert, paralleling how multiple people are vying for Jasmine's hand. Or else look at Tiana, who wears yellow or has some form of it in the first half of the movie, representing her dream. Then the blue dress comes when she's been disconnected from her dream and is reduced to wishing on stars. And then by the end, when she has it all, she wears the colour blue and yellow make when you mix them together. And she'd also worn a green dress as a child. And Rapunzel was envisioned as a bohemian type. So she walks around barefoot and has her hair completely down, and her dress has this imperfect vibe, giving the impression that she sewed it herself. With Asha's design, her dress is in a very muted colour, and it seems quite uniform in contrast to the bold pastels of Rapunzel's. It tells me she's serious, and closer to maybe Pocahontas in terms of personality. So this design does not scream peppy, quirky girl to me. Even with Moana, you can see in the design of the hair that she's got a sort of free spirit vibe, and curly hair is often used to signal a nonconformist. But Asha's design gives me serious, no-nonsense vibes, and since she's overthrowing a dictatorship, that's probably the characterization they should have gone with. I'd heard the hullabaloo about Mirabelle and was pleasantly surprised, so I went into Wish with an open mind, and unfortunately that left me vulnerable to the volley of forced jokes and manufactured quirkiness that now makes me understand how Brando felt in this scene. Horror. And Disney, you had Ariana DeBose as the lead in a Disney musical. It is a crime how wasted she is in this role. If I could describe the vibes I get from seeing her in interviews or other roles, I would say cool and sophisticated. Her Anita in West Side Story is witty and elegant, and every facet of her character seems to flow out of her performance so seamlessly that she makes the screen come alive with something as simple as a look. And even though it's a supporting role, she feels utilised to her full potential, no doubt helped by having one of the greatest directors at the helm, as well as a very solid update to the original screenplay.
I want to dance.
In Wish, she feels constrained. I don't want to say she's forced into an archetype she doesn't fit, because, again, the script of this movie is genuinely nightmarish in its awfulness, but it feels like she is.
Help me! Best friend and honorary doctor of all things rational. My interview is in 1 hour, and I'm so nervous I think I'm going to explode.
I want to like Asha because I'm a fan of her actress, and she is really trying. Unfortunately, it's kind of a perfect storm of really missing the mark. Her quirkiness does not endear her to the viewer and merely draws attention to how manufactured this persona is. Her songs don't invite us to know her and connect with her, and the result is that I feel like I've just watched a music video, rather than being a passenger on an emotional journey that gives me a taste of this character's soul. That might be definitely hyperbolic, but you get me? Asha is given nothing to work with, and so she can neither reinvent the wheel like, say, Ariel, Jasmine, or Esmeralda, nor can she stand alongside the best of her contemporaries. And while some of her predecessors can give the impression that they're more an assembly line of traits with the quirkiness there to do some heavy lifting, their characters and the quality of their films at least make me second guess that. This film, however, shines a light on the whole thing, and as something designed as a milestone to celebrate 100 years of the company's existence, is that really what you want?
Our name is a fantastic asset, and it represents a terrific man who was very creative. And I'd hate to be the person who shot himself in the foot and ended it.
So the conclusion here should really be a simple one. Write better characters. But what does that even mean? Because this is an industry-wide issue, where in an attempt to try and predict what audiences want, works of art have become more content designed to appeal to what the algorithms are favouring at the moment, and currently pre-existing IPs are considered the only safe bet. With 2024 setting a record for being the first year where all but one of the top 10 grossing films of the year were sequels, and that's pretty much all Disney's planned output consists of besides the live-action remakes. And now, Disney are experiencing the same kind of floundering that led to them stopping animated films in the 2000s. I mean, Wish was a net loss of $131 million, and as Deadline puts it, audiences and critics smelled that the movie reeked of corporate product rather than magical event. Meanwhile, the Snow White remake is projected to lose $115 million, and while Moana 2 did gross $1 billion, this could actually be a cause for hope. Back in the 80s, the Disney company hit rock bottom when The Black Cauldron was beaten at the box office by the Care Bears movie, and that was eventually what led to the Renaissance. As they say, necessity is the mother of invention, and slump periods are usually followed by eventual boom periods. Audiences always tell studios what they will turn up for, and eventually their accountants make them listen. People are calling for them to bring back 2D animation, bring back romance, bring back proper villains, bring back heroines who aren't adorkable or girl bosses. And what do I want out of all of this? While I would like all those aforementioned things, what I want isn't based around ingredients, but on how they're utilised. Bring back actual stories that feel like they were made by people who loved what they were creating. I honestly don't care what specific tropes they contain. If the film is CGI about an adorkable girl boss who has no love interest or villain because that's what was best for that particular story, and it's legitimately good, I'll turn up. And since I don't want to end on a depressing note, and this is somewhat relevant, I feel like announcing that I have another book on the way called Joanna and the 12 Crowns, which is a retelling of the 12 Dancing Princesses fairy tale, and very much if Guillermo del Toro was making Once Upon a Time. And yep, after me talking a big game for the last few minutes, I did indeed write 12 different princesses, and about 8 princes to go along with them. And I'm not going to go on about how subversive it is and all the deconstructions I'm pulling, but rather, consider this an attempt at a reconstruction. Hopefully I'll have more updates for you very soon.